Welcome to the Poisoner's Almanac. I'm Adam. Want to shout out monthly supporters by name here right from the jump. Carl Ziegler Jr. and Taylor McCaleb. Thank you guys so much for being monthly financial supporters of the podcast. We really appreciate that. Becca and I have been brainstorming about a whole other layer of content on this podcast that might come in the form of subscriptions on Spotify, which would unlock a whole other separate feed of episodes, or possibly doing a Patreon. We're not sure. You guys let us know what you think about all that in the comments on socials or direct messages, whatever you prefer. The podcast Instagram, Poisoners_Almanac on Instagram. And yeah, I just want to turn Becca loose as the gifted and talented researcher that she is and creating.
You sure about that?
I'm 100% sure. She is a brilliant, she's the talent of this podcast. Let's be honest. Let's not lie to ourselves. I want to turn her loose on creating a whole other layer of content for you guys, but we're not sure what that's going to look like. You just let us know what you think about all that. We'd love to have your support with that. Thank you also for leaving all these 5-star reviews on the podcast. That acts like a tip jar in and of itself, in that it pushes the podcast out into the algorithms of all the platforms that you listen to the podcast on. So thank you for that.
And we're going to keep carrying on.
Right. We will carry on with our standard episodes for free, no matter what. We're just brainstorming about, okay, what's the next level for the content of the podcast? Because, you know, Becca is just in her element when she is putting all this research and collating all the different sources and all that fun stuff for you guys. So we think in the near future, there's going to be a transition to that extra layer, so to speak. So, but all in all, folks, your listenership is more than enough for us. So if you never financially support us, that's fine. Just want to put it out there for the quote unquote super fans. So let's get into the episode. Hey, everybody, it's Adam.
And Rebecca.
Welcome back to another episode of the Poisoner's Almanac. How are you, my dear?
I'm sore because I've been doing, I do Taekwondo twice a week. My daughter started it and then I got talked into it. And it's really great, though.
Talked into it. You talked yourself into it.
That's true. I really wanted to do it, but I was super nervous because there's people involved. But
right.
But these people don't make fun of my clumsiness, and it's really nice. So
that's correct.
But
it's been great. I really enjoyed watching you guys do your thing.
Well, it's helped me with sort of learning how to focus some more, and also the mind-body focus, where like because you have to think these moves through and then make your body do them. Like for me, that's not a fluid thing.
No, it's not.
And I really struggle with getting my arms and legs to do things that I see in my brain. So
exactly. And for those of you who haven't heard us say it before, Becca is actually neurodivergent. She's got some level of autism, ADHD going on. So her brain is not wired the same as mine. And you guys could probably tell from listening to us, I sound like a boring NPC extrovert. My wife is the mastermind, probably come up with a fantastic Ponzi scheme.
Not sure what that says about me, but I'll take it.
Anyways.
But yeah, I'm sore from that, but it's been good.
I am so excited for part 2 of, what was the title here? It's part 2 of Radium and the Doomed,
Dial Painters.
The Doomed Dial Painters.
Yeah.
Part 2.
Yes.
Guys, Rebecca devoured this book called Radium Girls. Who is it by?
Kate Moore.
By Kate Moore.
There's other books too written on this subject, but I really enjoyed this one very much. Very nice.
And we even watched a documentary on a streaming service about this.
Oh, that was The Poisoner's Handbook.
The Poisoner's Handbook.
They don't go into the story of the Radium Girls specifically. I mean, they mention it,
Yeah.
But radium is definitely something they look at
Certainly.
on that.
Um,
But Poisoner's Handbook is actually a documentary that was made after a book. The Poisoner's Handbook is also a book, and I honestly am blanking on the author's name of that right now, but it's a really good book too.
Maybe put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
So,
good stuff.
I told you guys before the last episode, Becca would look up from this book every 10 minutes with unrequited rage.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of injustice in this book.
Oh, that it's been bad so far.
Yeah,
so.
But it's good that it's brought to light, and
that's right.
I'm a big fan of learning from the mistakes of others.
Certainly.
I feel like history is a big deal for that reason, and we should be teaching accurate history, not leaving things out.
Oh boy.
Because
if you never learn history, you're simply doomed to repeat it. Am I right?
Exactly. I think we, I like accurate history.
Oh boy.
And I don't like banning books. Let's do it.
That's not my ministry.
Books and plants and books and plants and books and plants. Sorry.
Did you just come up with that?
It's something that's all constantly in my head.
Plants and books and plants. That's so hysterical. That's your life.
Basically, books and plants. I love it. I love it. Books and plants.
Oh, that was amazing. I'm not going to stop.
When I'm nervous, I literally chant that in my head. Books and plants and books and plants and books and plants.
And you're telling me the truth.
I'm straight.
I believe you.
A little weird, and that's okay.
Narrator. She was in fact strange. Okay. You ready to dig into part 2 right here?
Ready to what?
Excuse me. Landed a little hard on that G.
Am I ready to what now? This is not that kind of podcast.
Woo!
Okay.
This is a family show.
We're talking about radium.
Are you ready to pause, dig in to part 2?
I sure am, Freud.
I've been reading a lot of fairy smut.
Yeah, let's keep that for outside the podcast.
I regret nothing.
Maybe we'll, do a Patreon on, or we do that. But
I am deceased.
Hey,
careful with those G's, everybody.
Yeah, watch those G's.
Okay, I'm fine.
It's an important letter. Okay, moving on. So, I don't know how we transition to this.
There's no way. Let's just move on.
I'm already bad at transitions, but part 2 of the Radium Girls. So last time we went over what radium is, correct? And how it was discovered, what it has been used for in the past, and some of what it does to the human body. So we talked about how the body sees it as calcium, deposits in the bones, and radium literally just disintegrates, destroys the bones over time.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to talk about a little more of the long-term effects of radium for those who make it to the long-term effects as well.
Right.
So we're going to get to some of that as well.
Right.
We also went through a whole list of names, and I told you a little bit about the stories of these people and the parts they played in all this. I will definitely run through those names again, as well as include lists of these on the Instagram post, because I know we did talk about a lot. And if you're like me, I am terrible with remembering names and of people and who they belong to.
Sure.
So I'm definitely going to remind you of that.
Yes. Becca's gonna you guys make sure you follow the podcast Instagram, _Almanac. There'll be a link in the show notes. Becca does such a good job just getting even on an even deeper, more granular level with our content over there. Just make sure you check that out.
You're really nice. So thank you for that, because
You're welcome.
I'm not as nice to myself.
Also, I love you.
Behind on everything, but I'm getting there.
Also, I love you. Will you marry me? You're pretty.
Oh my God. So dial painters we discussed that we're going to dig into were from the Newark Orange part of New Jersey. These were Catherine Schaub, Grace Fryer, Quinta McDonald, Marguerite Carlo, Edna Hussman, and Albina Maja Larice, which I'll probably refer to her mostly as Albina Maja. But she got married. Her last name is Larice. So We also discussed the tragic cases of Molly Maja. This was Albina's sister. Irene Rudolph. That was Catherine's cousin, I believe. And Hazel Vincent Cuser. Also Helen Quinlan and Sarah Carlo, who have already died at this point in our story from radium poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned Arthur Roeder. This is the U.S. Radium Corporation's president at this time. We also mentioned a Dr. Sabin von Sochaki, who was one of the co-founders alongside Dr. George Willis. Dr. von Sochaki also was the creator of the undark luminous paint using the radium. So he kind of created the formula for the paint itself.
Mm-hmm.
The company also hired Dr. Frederick Flynn to prove their workers were in good health. This is the guy they hired because they had contacted Dr. Cecil and Catherine Drinker to create a report based on exams, and they didn't like their report because their report was basically like, yeah, radium's dangerous. And so they were like, we don't like that. We're going to hire a different doctor who agrees with us.
Of course.
So that was...
It's science.
Yeah. So that's Dr. Frederick Flynn that they hired. He's the guy also who was like helping the Ethel Corporation with the whole lead's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Anything wrong with
Lead
that?
is totally fine.
Yeah. So
I wash my hands with it.
don't like that guy.
I want to wash my hands and face and hair with snow.
Oh my gosh. I am honestly like, I wish at this point we had some snow because this heat is killing me. The heat, by the way, UV radiation. So this is, it's good that we're talking about radiation here.
Oh boy.
Wear sunscreen. Please wear sunscreen.
Please do that.
Anyway, back to this kind of radiation, back to radium. We also want to remember Catherine Wiley, the women's ally from the Consumers League. She's that executive assistant from the Consumers League.
It was hidden from them that their full report was not published, right? Was not turned over to...
She's a part of that.
Right.
So she found out that most of the report was hidden. It was like, hey, that's not cool.
Okay.
And also the statistician, I cannot say that word, statistician. That's better.
Statistician.
Oh my gosh. Statistician. She just hired to review the cause of the girl's symptoms, Dr. Frederick Hoffman. So I think we're caught up with most of the names that we need to know.
Okay.
And
good.
If I mention anyone else, we'll review.
My flow chart is complete. Please continue.
So we've done our review. Now, I think last time we stopped with the girls literally having some terrible symptoms.
Yeah.
And right now we're in May of 1925. At this time, the county physician for Essex County, who was George Warren, died suddenly, leaving the chief medical examiner position open. This job went to a Dr. Harrison Martland, who's going to play a major role in our story. It was soon after this.
This is a county medical examiner?
Right. And medical examiners were kind of before medical examiners, you had the coroners, and the coroners could just kind of do whatever they wanted. They weren't even, most of them weren't even in the medical field. They were just voted in, and you could pay them off to put whatever death you wanted on them.
I loved the political science professor that I took like intro poli-sci from in college. He literally described the elections for coroner as, coroner is the guy who shows up and says, yep, he's dead.
Yeah, and like
that's how he described.
It wasn't meant to be like that, but that's what it became.
Sure.
So
it's a little more complex than that, but kind of compared to all the other elected positions, it's a little.
So honestly, the history of medical examiners is fascinating to me, and I know that seems like it's just a thing, but it's like it's a big deal.
Yeah, nobody cares about that until somebody dies.
Yeah, it's a really big deal.
Everybody wants to know how they died.
Yeah. And I could go off on so many tangents with this, but we're going to get back to this before I do. Now, it was soon after this that another worker at the Radium Corporation died. It was this time. One of the chemists at the Drinkers had noticed that he had hand lesions when they did their report. And of course, because it's a man, now they're going to actually look into this a little more, right? Because men matter, right?
Ah, yes.
Anyway.
Fun.
Fun. Now, he died at 36 of pernicious anemia.
Anemia again.
Yeah. You'll notice that
the
a lot.
bone marrow is unavailable to keep up the red blood cell supply, right?
Right. It's unable to do that because of the radium in the bones.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Martland performed an autopsy and planned to devise a way to test for radium poisoning, as he suspected it was the cause. Now, he had heard about women's cases before this. Like, it was local news mostly. And he'd had doctors reaching out to him, asking him what he thought about it and such, but he could actually take an interest in it since he was now the medical examiner here. So he knew about these girls' health issues and believed that it had to do with the radium. Now, Dr. Sabin von Sochocki, the previous co-founder
That's fun to say.
of the corporation and the creator of the paint used at the Radium Corporation, was brought in to assist in the matter. He no longer worked with the corporation. They basically ousted him when Arthur Roeder took over. So, yeah.
Why did he want Sochocki out?
And, I mean, he just wanted to be the leader of the corporation, so. He was the treasurer. Roeder was the treasurer before he became the president of the company.
I see.
And, yeah. Dr. George Willis apparently gave him a bunch of shares. And so there was a company takeover, and they ousted the two co-founders, which includes Sochocki.
Interesting.
Now, Sochocki was also the doctor who told, remember in the last episode, he told Grace Fryer, don't do that.
Don't do that.
He noticed,
you'll get sick.
Yeah, when he noticed her putting the stuff in her mouth.
I am immediately watching his character arc.
Yeah, so. Now, von Sochocki had written in February of 1925 that the girls' health issues were definitely because of their work with radium. Because he knew. He was like, this is definitely...
He wrote this?
This is definitely a connection. He was mostly in the lab. He was very rarely in the area they were doing that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I don't know if he knew they were putting it in their mouths.
Apparently not.
Or if maybe he somewhat did. And at that time, he was just like, it's fine. Because he was rather careless with it too.
Yeah.
But he did tell her not to do that. And here we are. We'll see. Now, the company told Dr. Martland that they would help with this research on this new death if the conclusions were kept secret. So I think they wanted to know, too, just to see how they could, benefit from that understanding, that knowledge. But also, they knew that they might need their assistance using the lab. So they did use the lab. And I think one of their chemists actually helped with this research. But like I said, they wanted him to keep it a secret. Which is a red flag. I mean,
immediate red flag girl. I thought it was a carnival.
So, using the company's lab, they turned the chemist's bones to ash, then tested them with an electrometer. It was confirmed at this point that he had died from radium poisoning. So, the radium had caused his anemia. So,
and this is a big step because they're using some sort of clinical test.
They are, even though they're sworn to secrecy.
Yeah.
By some,
it's the principle of it. Yeah.
Yeah, by some corporate jerks, Now, von Sochocki then asked Dr. Martland to help the dial painters, so it was off to the hospital where he met with Marguerite Carlo, whose palate at this point had literally eroded into her nasal passages.
Oh my gosh.
Her sister, Sarah Malifer, was also there, but just as a visitor at this point. Now, while there, Dr. Martland noticed that Sarah was looking very ill herself. So he actually had the hospital test her, just kind of examine her. And she was found to be severely anemic.
Uh-oh.
So she, too, was dealing with pain in her jaw and elsewhere. She was the kind of person, though, that was focused on the other people around her.
Sure.
And so she's not really thinking about herself so much.
Was she a coworker or she was just in the room with her sister?
No, she worked there, too.
Okay.
They both worked there. Yeah. She was admitted to the hospital as well and shared a room with her sister. Her face became swollen on one side, though, and she developed a high fever. But during this time, Dr. Martland and Dr. von Sochocki devised a way to test the living for radium poisoning, because at this point they were only able to do it from the ash of the bones of the dead. And one way was to hold an electrometer above the patient's bones, such as where your sternum is and your chest. So the chest was used in this instance. To test for gamma rays. The other was to use an electroscope to test for radon on the patient's breath as they breathed into it. They created kind of this breathalyzer sort of test for
that's fascinating.
radiation.
Okay.
So now they decided to test Sarah first, as she had rapidly declined. Holding the electrometer above her chest, they discovered that her body was giving off 14 subdivisions in 60 minutes. Normal in this case would have been 10 subdivisions in 60 minutes.
Uh-oh.
For the breath test, Sarah had to fight to breathe into the electrometer.
Mm-hmm.
Normal would have been 5 subdivisions in 30 minutes. Sarah's results were 15.4 subdivisions in that time. So she was literally breathing out radon. Like you and I, we breathe out carbon dioxide as we should.
That's unthinkable.
She was breathing out radon because of how much was inside of her.
Yeah.
And she was actually, she was increasingly septic. They moved her to a different room, to like an intensive care type situation. And she actually died 2 days later at the age of 35 on June 18th, 1925. There was no agreement to secrecy this time, though. So.
Sure. Yeah, this is the hospital.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Marlin spoke to the media the day she died and said he was sure she had died from radium poisoning and was planning to test her bones and organs now to prove it. Her name would also be added to the case being brought against the Radium Corporation, Marguerite's case.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
The company continued to deny their role in any of the girls' sicknesses and deaths, backed by Dr. Flynn, who they had hired to help them. They claimed...
The lead guy?
The lead guy. Claimed that even if there was a risk, the girls only handled a tiny amount. But Dr. Marlin was able to prove later that the amount did not matter. During his autopsy of Sarah Malifer, he only found 180 micrograms. It wasn't just in her bones either, it was in her organs. Dr. Marlin also took portions of the girls' bones, Sarah's bones, and placed dental films over them before putting them in a dark room. Within 60 hours, her bones created this white, foggy exposure on the film.
Yeah. So you said he's stipulating that the amount doesn't matter.
Right. It's the fact that it's there at all is toxic, and it will continue to eat away at the bones.
It'll just do its thing.
Yeah. I mean, remember the half-life was like 1,600 years.
Right. Okay.
So it's going to, even if you have a tiny bit, it's going to keep devouring parts of you.
So I remember like way back when we first started the podcast, the dose makes the poison.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's almost like it doesn't, because it's any amount is going to.
Yeah, and this is also radioactivity, so it's, and I think the half-life comes into play too. Mm-hmm. So even the tiniest bit is basically going to be toxic because of how long it lasts in your system.
Right. Okay.
If the half-life were different, it might mean something different. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you would have some complications, and then eventually it would finally leave your system. And you might still have those complications you had before, but it might not end up killing you.
Sure. Okay.
It just depends. So he listed Sarah's cause of death as acute anemia caused by the ingestion of luminous paint, which is a big deal at this point because now it's directly pointing to her occupation. Mm-hmm. All right. Remember the drinkers report? Cecil and Catherine?
Oh, yes.
Dr. Drinkers?
Oh, yes. Great last name for doctors, by the way.
Imagine at this point they'd like a drink.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that Arthur Roeder still did keep his word about sending the full report to the Department of Labor.
The shock.
You remember Dr. Drinker was like, hey, I won't publish this if you just send a full copy like you're supposed to.
And he was like, okay, sure.
Yeah. He said he would.
I'll do exactly that.
Right. And he didn't.
Now look here, see?
Yeah.
This is the 30s, right?
20s, 30s. Now, learning about this, Dr. Drinker was now like, screw this guy. And he just had his report published soon after Sarah's death. Mm-hmm. Even after all of this, the Radium Corporation denied their part in everything. Now they tried to say that the girls were just not in good shape when they came to work for them.
Her jawbone was falling on the floor all the time. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, no idea. They just had bad teeth. What do you want us to do?
Yeah.
So Catherine Wiley, the Consumers League lady, she found Dr. Frederick Hoffman the statistician I mentioned, he specialized in industrial diseases, and he also worked for the Prudential Insurance Company.
Yeah, you don't want that smoke.
He did his own investigation and made sure to send a letter to Arthur Roeder of the U.S. Radium Corporation, telling him, and this is his words, if the disease in question were compensable, I seriously doubt if your company would escape liability. That it will be made compensable in the course of time if further cases should arise is self-evident.
That's medical speak for you're screwed, buddy.
Yeah. Although they still didn't want to believe that.
Of course not.
Now, Dr. Martland now ran the breath test for Marguerite Carlo, who was still in the hospital. The normal numbers changed based on humidity. So, like, they're basically accounting for variables, you know, that kind of thing. This time, the normal would have been considered 8.5 subdivisions in 50 minutes. Hers were measured at 99.7 subdivisions in 50 minutes.
Oh, boy. That's like a factor of 10.
It's a lot.
You usually hear, like, in DUI cases, it's like, oh, yeah, his breathalyzer was twice the legal limit or 3 times the legal limit. That's 10 times the normal limit.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Because, like, and the fact that there's a normal limit, like, they're testing not simply for radium, they're testing radioactivity, and there is going to be a normal amount of radioactivity coming off of you, not because of radium, so to speak, but when you involve radium into the situation or any other kind of radioactive substance, it's going to make it increase. So that's what they look for.
And it's wild to think that there is a trace amount of radioactive brouhaha happening just because there are atoms and molecules involved.
Yeah. I mean, people crazy. Like, you know, I am a sunscreen freak. Okay. I know that I am.
Can confirm.
But I mean, the sun is basically one big ball of radioactive mess. And not that, okay, look, me and the sun have a complicated relationship. I love plants. Plants need that. We need the sun. We do need
Scandinavian lineage.
We do need the sun. It's just that the UV radiation coming off of it can cause harm if you don't protect yourself.
Of course.
So the dose makes the poison. So anyway, moving on. So Catherine Schaub, Quinta McDonald, and Grace Fryer also came in for the test, and each was finally diagnosed with what was actually causing them harm, which is radium. Dr. von Sochaki even tested himself and found that he, out of all of them, had the most radiation. So
that is unfortunate.
Yeah. Now, remember, he was pretty careless with it when he worked in the lab. But,
right.
But remember, like the labs, like people in the lab actually had some protective equipment. The girls had none. In fact, they were putting this stuff in their mouth all the time, being told it was safe.
Yeah.
So
this is like that part in the Lego movie where Unikitty goes, there's also no consistency.
I love Unikitty. It's like my brain. Now, Catherine Shaw provided the names of the girls they had known working in the radium factories so that Dr. Martland could track them with a chart that would become known as the List of the Doomed. So
they didn't workshop that, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I mean, it does. I guess it works because there is no getting
group involved.
There is no getting this out of your system.
The List of the Doomed tests well with single mothers from 35 to 45.
For every death, he would mark through and put D for death. Because he's keeping a list of like symptoms and it will come in handy later. I mean, it's terrible that these girls are going through this, but
but you got to keep.
I mean, he's keeping
recorded data.
Yeah. Now she was able to give him about 50 names. These are just people that she knew. I don't know 50 people right now that I talk to. Like, I could not tell you 50 people that I know right now.
You guys just, I know Becca very well. That's one of the truest things she's ever said about herself.
Yeah. So as soon as Grace Fryer, Quinta McDonald, and Catherine Schaub found out, they knew they needed to find a lawyer and bring suit against the company. They were growing worse, and there was nothing that could cure them. They were also strapped financially, and none of this was their fault. They're basically paying for something that they had, this was not their fault. And, none of them knew this was going to happen to them. They started by going to the lawyer that Marguerite Carlo had found. It turns out that the Carlo Cuser Mellifer case, those are all the names on it. Marguerite Carlo was the only one alive left on that lawsuit. The rest was their family suing. This case was going through the federal court system, where the statute of limitations for occupational compensation was 2 years, which worked at least for Marguerite. They would end up getting a settlement. Of course, it wouldn't really help the girls who were gone or for Marguerite's health, but they did end up getting a settlement. But for Grace, Quinta, and Catherine, things were different. The company wanted the case to go through the Workmen's Compensation Bureau, which only had a 5-month statute of limitations in New Jersey.
Yes.
Also, radium poisoning had yet to be listed as a compensable disease. There's like a list that you have to have one of those diseases on the list for it to be compensable.
They're recognized as compensable.
Yeah. And radium doesn't necessarily show up with symptoms until later. Like you may have some soreness, some flu-like symptoms, or some, you're just tired, but you're not going to always put together that that's you're seriously ill. Yeah, you don't. This didn't show up for these girls, and they obviously didn't learn the truth about what was going on with them until much later. So the company also was very wealthy and had very powerful lawyers. And these girls had little to nothing left, and the case was dropped before it even began. I mean, they couldn't even find a lawyer that would really take them on.
It's terrible.
Now, while Marguerite's case had been settled, she was still in the hospital. She'd been in the hospital for a while. Her red blood cell count was only about 20% of what it should have been, and the color of her blood was nearly white.
That's insane.
She just wasn't producing red blood cells.
I can't even imagine.
Now, X-rays showed that her lower jaw was nothing more than a stump now. Meanwhile, Edna Hussman, who was told by Dr. Flynn, the company doctor, that she was in perfect health, was actually getting weaker by the day, and she was in terrible pain, especially in her back and her legs. She walked with a limp, and when she took a slight tumble one day, she actually ended up breaking the neck of her femur. The doctor she saw after that would go on to say, "I have never seen a young woman with such a fracture occurring spontaneously."
Right. He's comparing it to the population that it typically occurs with, which is much older people.
This is a young girl who shouldn't have these health issues.
Something pathological is going on with their bones in that case.
Now, Albina Maja Larice, who we mentioned only briefly last episode, and this is just a quick trigger warning for pregnancy, child loss, that kind of thing. She finally was able to become pregnant, but it would not end well. The baby was stillborn, and she went on to have another miscarriage and would also have to have an abortion when she became pregnant a third time because of her condition, because they knew the baby wasn't going to I'm not surprised at all that you couldn't complete a viable pregnancy. Yeah. Now, Marguerite Carlo ended up catching pneumonia while still in the hospital, likely due to her horribly weakened immune system. She was allowed to come home for Christmas, but she passed away December 26th, 1925, at the age of 24, dying 6 months after her sister Sarah.
She probably willed herself through Christmas Day with her family.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's travel briefly to Ottawa, Illinois, not Canada.
Okay.
Illinois, where another dial painting plant was operating called Radium Dial.
Well, just come right out and say it.
Yeah, right. Well, remember, radium is like this miraculous thing to people at this point. There are people drinking waters with radium in it.
Yeah.
This particular plant had moved around various areas before settling here in 1922. One of the first workers there was Catherine Wolfe, a 19-year-old living with her aunt and uncle. She would be joined by 16-year-old Charlotte Nevins and Mary Vicini, who was only 13. Just go ahead. I know you want to do it. Do it.
There's not a lot of money in revenge. I work for Vicini to pay the bills.
We were told to go back to the beginning.
So here I am.
Anyway, anybody want a peanut? Sorry.
There is.
Now I need to watch that movie.
I will explain. No, there is too much. I will sum up.
Okay, now Mary Vincini, who she was only 13. There was an age, listed in the help wanted stuff for this company. They said 18 and older, but a lot of these girls just kind of told them they were 18, and they were like, "Yeah, sure, you look 18." They didn't care. I don't think they really cared, to be honest. So, and honestly, the smaller the hands, the easier it was.
Sure. And also, you're a woman. Nobody cares.
Right. Now, those running the studio and instructing the girls were Lottie Murray, Rufus Reed, and his wife, Mercedes or Mercy Reed.
Mm-hmm. Who would choose the bear? I'm just kidding.
I mean, wouldn't you?
Just throw that in.
Mrs. Reed was actually known to straight up eat the paint, like from a spatula.
Okay.
In order to prove that it was safe. Like, first of all, ew. Also, just because someone eats something to prove that it's safe, that doesn't mean I'm going to believe that it's safe.
I have so many notes.
No. Like, and we've all seen, like, the challenges, all the social media challenges of the past. You don't cop things that just don't seem... Just because one person does it doesn't mean you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. But they also were told it was safe. Also, just eating paint. Mm-hmm. Okay. The girls were instructed to do the same as those working at the U.S. Radium Corporation. Lip point to paint the dials. Because the paint was believed by all the workers to be safe, it was handled pretty carelessly. The girls ate lunch right there at their workstations, and washing up after work was optional, so most chose not to. They'd rather glow in the dark because that was fun. I mean, if it wasn't poisonous, it would be fun, I suppose,
Do you like your job? I mean, we glow in the dark when we get home. You know what I'm saying?
It became trendy. It really did.
You haven't lived.
Right. They, like the girls in New Jersey, also enjoyed playing around with the paint, using it as cosmetics and painting their faces with and nails with the stuff. Some actually took the paint home and used it on their walls or played with it with their siblings. It seemed that the job was just as glamorous here as in New Jersey, and the other girls actually envied them for the glow they would give off. Like, they would even have girls who didn't have to work, like wealthy daughters of these wealthy men would come in for like a day or two just to sort of
get the glow,
experience it, just to experience it. Yeah.
Oh, you have that youthful glow about you. What is it? It's radium.
And you could say that back then, and they'd be like, "Oh wow, yeah, great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, my brother drinks that stuff."
Where do I get some?
They would earn the now ironic name Ghost Girls because of the way they glowed. Now, Margaret Looney, she was known as Peg, joined the girls there in 1923 at 17 years old. Marie Becker joined later, as did many more. I'm just going to read these names off. We're not going to talk about every single one. We'd be here for many, many parts. But Frances Glasinski, her little sister Marguerite, Mary Ellen Cruz, also known as Ella Cruz, Mary Duffy, Ruth Thompson, Sadie Prey, Della Harveston, Inez Corcoran, and Helen Monk, I believe it is, and Pearl Payne were among them. And you may hear me go back and just mention those names over time, but yeah. Charlotte Nevins only started 13 months before leaving to become a seamstress. When Marguerite Carlo's legal case against the U.S. Radium Corporation made the news in New Jersey, Radium Dial was made aware, but none of their workers were told about it. Because local news at this point, like, it didn't exactly spread very far back then. They didn't have TikTok.
Right.
So now Radium Dial pulled a U.S. Radium Corporation and hired their own doctors to do exams without telling the girls anything. Mind you, they would just do these exams. And I feel like this is honestly an invasion of privacy too, because it's just like they would just basically, I think these exams happened at the manager's house. Like, they just did these weird exams there, and like the girls were never allowed to know the results.
What was happening? Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, they weren't really told why it was happening either.
Of course, I'm sure they weren't.
But they were just like, okay.
They're probably never dignified with they consider that they're not, they're
Right.
women, so they don't need to know.
Basically, that's how they are. So yeah, only the company would know any test results. They only included some of the girls in the test, though, and tended to separate them throughout. I think this was mainly so they could have some good reports if they needed them in lieu of the bad ones. Like they would just kind of figure out who was doing well, anyway. Yeah. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did send an investigator in April of 1925. Sven, what's his name again? You helped me last time.
Sven Kier.
Sven Kier. Okay.
Or Cure.
Cure.
That it's a Kjoer. That's how it's spelled.
A-E-R.
And that's like a A-E-R. Let me see it again. Kier.
Kier.
So the J right next to the K is pronounced almost like a Y.
Kier. Okay.
Yeah.
Sven Kier. To check out the plant because of the news spreading around. Radium Dial specifically asked that it be kept quiet so as not to send the workers into a panic. But Kier was pulled after a few weeks because the original investigation had been based on the possibility of phosphorus in the paint, not radium. Since it had been proven that it did not contain phosphorus, no further review was deemed necessary.
Who cares about phosphorus?
I mean, yeah. Also,
it's not the issue at hand, at least.
Right. Also, they didn't have the funding, apparently, to continue, so they just was like, never mind. Even so, in those few weeks, Kier had determined that radium was indeed dangerous. Now, other people still had no idea that radium was toxic. Even the American Medical Association at this time had it listed in possible remedies, so it wasn't seen as anything other than beneficial still. People were thinking like, oh, well, it's being used to treat cancer, not always successfully, and it actually causes worse problems for some.
Sure.
If overtreated with it.
At this point, I don't think we even understand cancer fully, right?
No. Yeah. They're just trying to... There's a lot of experimenting going on still. Let's also remember that one problem with the statute of limitations we mentioned before was the fact that radium often takes longer than the specified amount of time in those statutes to even show up via symptoms. So if the statute of limitations is 5 months, like in New Jersey, these girls would not know they had been poisoned at all until later.
Yeah.
And because of the law, could take no action for compensation against the company. And we're going to go back to the New Jersey girls in a moment, so hang in there. But by 1927, the girls in Ottawa, Illinois were starting to feel poorly. Most of them were exhausted all the time, and some had developed limps and pain in various areas of their body.
Yep.
Ella Cruz and Catherine Wolfe were both 24 at this time and were still working at the radium plant. Ella had started seeing doctors because of her exhaustion and jaw pain, as had Peg Looney, who was still working with them. Peg had just had a tooth removed, and the site was not healing. Lottie Murray, one of the managers that I mentioned a little while ago, she had recently died of cancer at this point, but no one had put 2 and 2 together that it was related at all. Ella's hands and legs were also sore all the time, and the doctors seemed to not know what was going on with her. I think a lot of people at this time were like, oh, you're sore, it's probably rheumatism. So they just kind of said what they thought it was. She also developed a hard bump under her chin, like a sort of growth, and later a tender spot on her cheek that she thought was just a pimple. Now, this particular spot began to swell, especially after she picked at it absentmindedly, as one does, And she went to the doctor about it, but he wasn't too concerned. And when her mother, who was with her, mentioned that she worked for the radium plant, the doctor apparently claimed it was the cleanest place that she could work.
Oh my gosh.
Now, remember, like a lot of these doctors are being given like pamphlets and propaganda about radium from the firms themselves. Like, oh, look at the research we've done. Anyway. Yeah. So a few days after this, the doctor was called to their house because she was feeling very unwell and couldn't leave, and the spot had swollen more. The doctor then tried to open it to drain it, but nothing came out. It became incredibly painful and only continued to swell. The next day, she was admitted to the hospital, where she was unrecognizable and septic at this point. She had fever, and her head was swollen and blackened as the tissue died.
Oh my gosh.
She passed away the next morning, September 5th, 1927. Her death was listed as streptococcic poisoning. So I'm guessing they're thinking that she got some bacteria in there and...
Yeah, but that's not how
No.
strep behaves on its own. It's,
I mean, like, especially in a young, healthy person.
No, it's a poisoning of some type.
It was a complete shock because the 24-year-old had just been working the week before and had always been in excellent health before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back in New Jersey, Catherine Schaub, Grace Fryer, and Quentin McDonald, Edna Hussman, and Albina Larice were fighting for their lives and for their rights. Grace now needed a steel back brace as her vertebrae had basically disintegrated from the radium. They basically said it was just crushed. The bone was just crushed.
Terrible.
She also had to wear a brace on one of her feet in which the bones had been eaten away. So they were basically just being held together. Now, the Radium Corporation's company doctor, Dr. Frederick Flynn, was holding to his statement that an industrial hazard does not exist in the painting of luminous dials. Okay.
You said that about lead.
Yeah, like this is the guy that Ethel had hired to tell everyone that lead was safe and should stay in gasoline and all that fun stuff.
Good.
Anyway, the company, with their powerful lawyers and their money, continued to deny any wrongdoing. One of the dentists that the girls had been seeing actually turned on them, telling the Radium Corporation that if they paid him what he was owed, since the girls could not at this point, he would testify on their side. A little betrayal over here.
Love it.
Yay.
There's a little oath that we take as healthcare workers where we say,
to do no harm.
I will do no harm.
Now, they were not the only ones fighting back either.
I will do no harm unless I want a lake house, is what I said when I took my oath. I don't know about you.
You want to lay what?
Unless I want a lake house.
A lake house. But we're eating amoeba at a lot of lakes around here, okay? In the South.
Different episode.
Also, Lake Lanier. Don't do that. Don't go there.
Stop it. Get some help. Okay.
Probably no relation to poisons, but don't do that. Yeah. I'm not superstitious. I'm a little stitious. Like, I'm not doing it. I'm not testing it out. Okay.
My, how the turntables have.
Now, Dr. Martland, who devised a test that proved the girls were radioactive, was getting major pushback for his reports, even though he'd clinically been able to prove that this was going on.
Mm-hmm.
There was finally a small win with the fact that Catherine Wiley, the lady from the Consumers League, she was able to get radium necrosis on the compensable diseases list, basically because of what it does to the jaw.
It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Thankfully, the girls would meet a powerful ally in Mr. Raymond Barry.
Why does it feel like a hero has just entered stage left?
Yes, enter Raymond Barry. He was a young lawyer with the boldness to take on the Radium Corporation.
I like it.
And he was intent on filing suit not just for the girls, but also their husbands. So, separate suits, basically.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Because, their health had been taken away, but these husbands' wives had basically been taken away from them.
Yeah, they're disabled.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
So, and the families, not just the husbands, but if those that weren't married, their families too.
But it makes sense because there's not a whole lot of precedence for pain and suffering compensation.
No.
Yeah.
And a lot of these families had to hire housekeepers to help because they could no longer do things.
I mean, if you lose a contributing member of the household in that case, this is how sick they are.
That costs money that a lot of these women don't have.
Of course.
So Raymond Barry decided to interpret the statute of limitations of 2 years, federally speaking, he was going to get it put into the federal courts, a bit differently. According to him, the 2 years could not have started until the girls knew they were sick from radium. They had not been diagnosed formally until 1925 with the tests that Dr. Martland had run. Also, the corporation had misled the girls the entire time, and they could not have brought a lawsuit against them until they knew
that they've been poisoned
by
an occupational hazard.
The next obstacle to get over was getting any of the doctors or dentists involved to testify in the case. Unfortunately, many of them, including Dr. Drinker, he and his wife who did the study earlier, and Dr. Martland, who came up with the breath test and all that, were not keen on testifying. They really just didn't want to get caught up in the whole
Yes, they don't want that smoke. And honestly, we want every character in this story to be like Raymond Barry. They seem like this unstoppable force for justice, but the cost that even Raymond Barry is staring down the entire time can be extremely high. These are extremely powerful people that you're confronting.
Also, I feel like if you're a doctor and at this point you're speaking out about something that's considered more of a cure than a poison at all, they might try to take your license away at that point.
That's right.
You never know.
They'll know people at the bar association for your state. And you can say, oh, that's not right. Well, yeah, that's what crooks do.
Yeah. Now, Barry did learn, however, that there had been at least 3 deaths among the dial painters at the Waterbury Clock Company. This is one of the watchmaking sites that the Radium Company had just set up shop in to make things cheaper. And he was determined to use these incidents to prove that the disease was occupational, as it was not just isolated to one place. However, because none of the families there had filed suit against the company, it had not been brought to the attention of the Workmen's Compensation Committee there in Connecticut, where the watch company was. In Connecticut, there was a more generous statute of limitations of 5 years. So why, you may ask, had no one filed suit? Well, that's because of Dr. Frederick Flynn, that ridiculous doctor that the Radium Corporation had hired to keep their reputation going strong. Now, Dr. Flynn had been doing all the exams on these girls and others at various locations, gaining their trust and telling them that they were in great health. He reportedly told one worker that she didn't have any amount of radium in her body, only to later see her die of radium poisoning.
Right.
Yeah. This was happening far too often. So when their health did start to fail, he also convinced them to simply settle with the corporation instead of bringing suit, so the company had never needed to deal with any more liability. So these girls trusted him and were like, they didn't know anything else about the legal system. These women were vulnerable, poor. They just were simply taken advantage of. Now, the settlements they did receive were not very high either. In one case, only $43.75 at that time, it would have been $606 today, was given to the family.
It feels like not a lot.
Right. In August of 1927, the good lawyer Raymond Barry started looking further into Dr. Flynn's past.
He will be referred to as such heretofore.
He starts looking into Dr. Flynn, and he discovers a bit of shocking news. Dr. Frederick Flynn was not a medical doctor.
Okay.
At all.
And I come back to you now at the turn of the tide.
Not a medical doctor. And this shocks kind of everybody. Catherine...
I am also shocked. Add me to the list.
Catherine Wiley's ally at Harvard, who was also a friend of the Drinkers, Alice Hamilton.
It's so great. Every time you say Drinkers, I'm like, why are they drinking so much? Forgetting they're the people who did the original study.
Yeah, that's just their name. Although, like I said, at this point, they might need one.
Well.
So, yeah, Alice Hamilton is a friend of the Drinkers. She also works at Harvard and knows Catherine Wiley. She wrote to Flynn after learning of this. And she told him, quote unquote, consider very seriously the stand you are taking. What are you doing? He, however, did not seem to care that he was practicing medicine without a license. And he's doing exams on these girls, too. He's
totally.
Literally just...
Totally.
This,
I wonder how many points of the 12-point systems review he actually touched on.
He shouldn't have been touching on anything. Let's be honest.
He shouldn't have. She looks fine to me.
Oh my God. That itself should be something you could sue over.
Oh, it is now.
It is now, yeah, but I don't know if it was back then.
Yeah, there's all sorts of lawyer jokes out there, but folks, let me tell you, the fact that you can sue for things that should be sued for nowadays is extremely, extremely fortunate and beneficial for society, actually.
Yeah. So, He was apparently an expert in industrial hygiene, whatever that means, but in no way was he a medical doctor. He would write.
I love it so much.
He literally would send out letters with this letterhead on it that had like such and such physicians and surgeons. Like he literally was pretending to be a freaking doctor. Like there was no oh, I didn't know. That he knew what he was doing.
All I see is Ron Swanson handing his permit to the park ranger, and he opens it up. He says, "It's just a piece of paper that says I can do whatever I want."
Exactly. Like he just.
I know more than you.
He just decided to wake up and be a doctor one day without the having the license
so
to do it.
So much fun. Season 2 is my favorite so far.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, not a medical doctor. So, Now, something incredibly helpful came along in the form of media, though. One of the most powerful newspapers in America at this time, The World, stepped in as an ally for the girls.
The paper's called The World, just in case the way she pronounced that didn't get you.
Why? What did I say?
It just felt like one of the most powerful papers at that time, The World. I don't know. It could be misconstrued as, in The World. What's the name of that paper?
The World. Yes, my bad. The World is the name of it.
Conspicuous inflection.
So, but like this,
every time you say it, you have to say, The World.
The World. Now, this paper was known for its views on justice and sticking up for, those who were in poor conditions and that kind of thing. It was very social justice-y. And
they probably never ran out of content in the 20s and 30s.
So they were really good to have, on your side.
Did they have an entire page just for people who'd been poisoned?
I mean, they should have at this point. So one of its lead writers and later its editor, Walter Lippmann, got the girls' stories out to the world, condemning the U.S. Radium Corporation for their lack of compassion and justice, as they should. Now, the girls were soon big news, and the country was very sympathetic to them, mostly. Barry's next course of action would be big. He needed more evidence that the deaths of the other girls that had suffered from radium poisoning, that they had actually suffered from radium poisoning. So his next step was to have Molly Maja exhumed so that her bones could be tested.
Oof.
Big step,
I know where this is going.
Especially at this time. Now, when her wooden coffin, which was not in great condition at this point, was dug up, they could actually see a glow coming from it. It was literally glowing.
I would quit that job immediately. Like if I'm a gravedigger, I'm like, listen, I love y'all. Any other kind of job I'll do. This is obviously not it.
So they took the body where an autopsy could be performed, and they cut bones from her upper jaw. The lower jaw was gone. This is the girl who the dentist had literally lifted away her lower jaw when she was still alive.
Oh, no.
So they got bones from her upper jaw, spine, skull, and ribs. Some of them they put against X-ray film, and the rest they reduced to ash to test for radioactivity, kind of like they did with that other guy who had died. And then they had to keep that one secret.
I just find it fascinating. You can burn the bone matter and it will still be radioactive. Like combustion doesn't even...
Yeah, there's no getting it out.
That's... Wow.
Yeah. So days later, they were able to see the white glow of the bones on the X-ray paper. And the ash test was also positive for radioactivity. They also found no evidence of syphilis, which was what was listed as her cause of death, if you remember.
Yes.
These results became public, which I imagine was like vindicating for her family too. Like
it would have, gosh, losing your child that way would have been horrific. But at least the fact that it was now in the it was public knowledge of what she died from.
Right. And that it wasn't, none of it was her fault. None of it was, came from some other illness that was actually the corporation's.
I'd have been watching what Raymond Barry was doing every day as soon as I found out he was working on this. Yeah.
So more girls came to see Raymond Barry soon after hearing about this, about their own cases, including Ella Eckert, who was friends with Molly Maja. She had been to multiple doctors and had multiple tests done on her to figure out what was happening to her body, and had been unable to work because of her shoulder, which was badly swollen and in pain at this point.
We know what that means.
She was currently a single mother and could not afford more medical care at this point either. So, for the deposition, which was on November 14th, 1927, this is where first testimonies would be given. Barry decided to issue a formal summons for the testimony of Dr. Drinker, who had been hesitant to testify. Now he had to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
smart.
Yeah. The company objected their way through that testimony, of course. Still, it was given, and the date for the start of the trial was set for January 12th, 1928. Now, this trial is to see if Barry's interpretation of the statute of limitations would hold up in court. So there's the
2 year.
There's so many
period.
trials, 4 trials.
Yeah, he's got to get. Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, his newest client, Ella Eckert, would not make it that long.
Mm-hmm.
She had been suffering anemia and other symptoms of radium poisoning, including that white shadowing of the bones on X-rays. Now, they also found a growth in her swollen arm and discovered that she had developed a sarcoma, cancer of the bone. This was apparently a new development amongst the dial painters, but one they would continue to see in workers that lasted long enough.
Yeah.
She declined quickly and died December 13th, 1927. January 12th, 1928 came. It's the date of this trial. And the first to give evidence was Edna Hussman, who basically had to be carried in by her husband at this point, as her legs had little mobility from her hips being locked at a weird angle. And she also could no longer use her right arm. So she couldn't even raise it to get for the oath and all that. This particular trial, like I said, is to see if Barry's interpretation of the statute of limitations would hold up.
Right.
So they had to go through this to get an actual trial for compensation. Now, Grace Fryer and Quentin McDonald also gave their testimony that day, all explaining how they worked for the U.S. Radium Corporation and how they had all been taught to lip point with the brushes, how everyone told them it was safe. They also explained their symptoms, doctors and dentist visits, and medical and financial troubles. Now, they were all afraid of even their skin bruising or being cut at this point because it just would not heal properly. Even needles used to draw blood would leave these unhealing marks, and the girl's skin was incredibly thin. Doctors Harrison Martlin, Sabine von Sochaki, and a Dr. Humphreys, who had been one of their primary physicians of the past, also gave testimony. And I won't describe the entire trial, but I do hope you go and read about it yourself. Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This is where a lot of my info was gathered, and it really does it justice, I think. So if you like any kind of true crime or trial dramas, those kind of things, I definitely recommend it. The company's attorney cross-examined everyone and were desperately trying to discredit everyone, even though fake Dr. Frederick Flynn was also there watching.
Love it.
Not even a doctor, and he's okay.
I love the image of wealthy corporate lawyers asking combative, discrediting questions to people who cannot move because of their illness.
Right. And the judge, in this case, noticed and sympathized with a lot of these girls. He noticed that he could look at them and see that they were disabled, as anyone could. Now, Barry rested his case, and it was time for the company to put their story forth. Their lawyer conveniently asked to leave some time for his side to get their stuff ready, I guess. Anyway, the judge decided to adjourn the case until September, which would have been 5 months later. This was not cool because some of these girls were so sick, they might not even be alive in 5 months.
That's right. This is absurd to ask for an adjournment like this.
Yeah. Now, Barry was able to find 2 other lawyers who were willing to give up a future scheduled case date so that the girls could get back into court sooner, give them their appointment, I guess.
Oh, wow. He negotiated with them.
Yeah.
Wow.
They were willing to do it, because they didn't think this was right either. And the judge was cool with that, but of course the company wasn't. And the lawyer was like, no, our testifying doctors are going on holiday that month, so they're not going to be here.
We're paying for it. That's how we know.
Yeah. So Barry and their ally, Lippman, writer for the World newspaper, The World, brought all of this to the public's attention, and the public was not happy.
Yeah.
Many letters were written in that were angry about the injustice happening. Letters also came in for the girls, most encouraging, but there were others that were just offering ridiculous cures. Some were even admonishing them for blaming radium. These were mainly from the other radium firms. So
cool. Good, good.
Now the case was now big news, and pictures and interviews were done with the girls. This made them very real to the people who were just astounded by their case and just intrigued by it all.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Barry heard from the U.S. Radium Corporation's lawyer, who was upset at all this good press that they had garnered.
How dare you?
They're doing like interviews with these girls and like learning about not only their story, but how they're feeling and what their life is like, that kind of thing.
It must have been
making it easy for people to sort of, sympathize with them.
Totally. And to stand with them.
Mm-hmm.
It must have felt like a warm cup of coffee on a cold morning to know that this newspaper is getting all of this out into the world. People finally know on a big scale.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Now, at this point, the judge assigned to their case, the one who'd already been pretty sympathetic with them, he advised Barry to use another interpretation of that pesky statute of limitations. If radium is in their bones, then it's still hurting them. Therefore, the statute really starts every time they are injured, which would be every day because it's still in their bones and it's still injuring them.
I like this judge. Sometimes, and this is not pertinent to current events at all, it helps to have a judge with a conscience.
Yeah. It's good to have morals, y'all. Good to have a conscience. Now, thanks to public pressure via the media, they got a quicker date to resume the trial. It would be towards the end of May.
Yeah.
However, with the girls worsening daily, Barry began to wonder if a settlement on their terms would be best because he's worried that this fight could go on and on and on, and they might not see the fruits of their labor ever.
And it's I keep having to deactivate my reflex to look at this through the 2024 legal lens. This is like the late 20s, right? And so there's no precedent for pain and suffering compensation. So if they die, that literally could bring this to an end.
Well, their families might get a settlement, but
right.
I think part of it, though, is just these girls seeing justice because
he wants them to see it.
Yeah, this is what has happened to them is incredibly unfair.
Yeah,
and they've known nothing but suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But also, and this is just the case to see if there is a case.
That's true.
So, so anyway, now at first the company offered $10,000, which would be $138,000 today.
Immediately no.
Yeah. They offered that each with all of the medical bills and cost of litigation being taken out from that. So it would leave basically nothing left for them.
That'll leave you with about $30.
Yeah. So the girls were immediately like, absolutely not. And they rejected that. Now, Barry came back with a counter offer of $15,000 or $208,000 today as a cash lump sum per woman. A pension of $600, it'd be $8,316 today, a year for life, past and future medical bills, and they have to cover the court costs as well. So, like, that was his counteroffer. Like, you're not gonna just pay them some money and then tell them they have to pay all these other things off.
I just remembered, like, the disability system wasn't around at that point, so you don't literally that pension functions as disability. I mean, it's peanuts, but it's not nothing.
And these girls, I mean, like the kind of disabilities they have and like the adaptations that they have, they're literally in steel braces because they just don't have the kind of stuff that we have today.
They're going to be totally dependent, totally dependent for all ADLs is what we call them.
There was one girl who basically just being pulled around in a wagon by her husband.
That's
just one story. There's plenty of other terrible stories.
A nightmare.
So the company finally gave in, but with conditions. The company said that they would be allowed to admit no guilt of negligence whatsoever.
Immediately no.
that they're not at fault, basically. And that would like allow them to just keep doing what they're doing.
If we passed any harder, you could call us Tom Brady.
The second condition would be that there would be a committee of 3 doctors put together, 1 doctor of their choosing, 1 of the girls choosing, and then 1 mutually chosen to examine the girls regularly. And this would be so that payments would cease if the girls were found to no longer be suffering from the poison.
Yeah.
That they still don't believe in, mind you.
Didn't we cover this in season 1?
Yeah, here we are. Now, this was acceptable to the girls, but Barry was afraid the company had a plan to get out of their responsibilities. And he would, of course, be right. But we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Well, yeah. Now, this settlement actually made international news, and the girls in Ottawa, Illinois, were now aware of the women who had been suffering, and it set off this fear in them and also a need for answers because they, too, were now feeling unwell. Peg Looney was still having issues with her gums and her jaw. Remember, she had that tooth that had been extracted and it was not healing.
Yeah. And the significance of this is far enough away geographically to where they do not know at all what's happening with the other. So when they receive, it could take a while for them to receive word that this is actually happening.
They're already having symptoms.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And they remembered Ella Cruz, who had died so suddenly and strangely the previous summer due to, her having that sore. And then they said she had an infection and then went septic and just died within days.
Yep.
So they remembered that. Due to the workers becoming nervous and less productive, the Radium Dow Company had their doctors do more exams and tests, but still kept the results from the workers. Mr. Reed, their current manager at this time, told them there is no such thing as radium poisoning. He also told them there is nothing to these stories of radium poisoning. Now, the company even went so far as to place a full-page ad in the local paper claiming that all the tests that had been done were diligent and complete and had come back normal and healthy and everything was fine.
It's science.
It's all fine. Everything's fine. Like I just see that dog sitting at the table with the fire everywhere. Everything's fine. Yeah. Now, they also included how the health of their employees was their priority. It's giving, we're a family. Just don't. Just don't do that.
You're a family? I quit.
Have you met my family? Also, I'm immediately turned off when a company says that because to me, that's just like, they're just trying to get me to trust them. And I'm like, why do you need me to trust you so bad? I'm immediately suspicious.
Yes.
Immediately suspicious when they say that.
Behind closed doors that you need my trust.
Right? I work for you. I don't need to spend my entire life with you. Anyway. Also, Radium Dow said that they were using pure radium, while that other company used mesothorium, which was only half true. It was a combination of the two, but also mesothorium is just another isotope of radium.
The same thing.
So it might have had a different half-life, but it's still radium.
Narrator. It was also radium.
Mr. Reed even told the girls that radium would give them good looks. It would make them look good. I think he specifically said it would give you rosy cheeks.
That's a tumor.
Oh God. Anyway, the day after that ad was in the paper, Ella Cruz's family, the girl who died the previous summer, filed a lawsuit against Radium Dow.
Let's go.
And that's where I'm going to leave us right there because things are about to get crazy.
Okay. I'm very excited. All right. So thank you guys so much for listening today. Part 3 of the Radium series here is coming up in the next episode. Thank you guys so much for leaving all your 5-star reviews. That helps push the podcast further into the algorithms of whatever platform you're on and into the ears of other listeners that would enjoy it like you. Also be sure to follow the podcast Instagram poisoners_almanac on Instagram. And me and Becca have been brainstorming about a whole other layer of content, whether it's supported by Spotify subscriptions or a Patreon or something of that nature, where we're just going to turn Becca loose as, she's the talent of the podcast. Let's not lie to ourselves. we just want to turn her loose into a whole other layer of content for subscribers or Patreon supporters, whatever. Let us know what you guys think in DMs or comments on the socials. We're just brainstorming that. We would keep our regular content going as usual, but we would just add that other layer for subscribers. So
yeah, we do this because we love it. So
yes, it's been a lot of fun.
Also,
and
don't eat paint.
don't eat paint, folks.
With a spatula or otherwise.
Yes. Utensils are not have no bearing on the situation. So also thank you just for being listeners. Even if you don't support us financially or anything like that, your listenership is more than enough for us. We just want to say thank you. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye for now.